Do you find it strange that we've been getting lectured about privilege from a prince and a princess?
Oh, I think it's beautiful. I mean, sometimes things just write themselves, don't they? Uh, um, yes, the privilege game. I'm not into the privilege game, by the way, because I think it's uh, irreducible. I think it. You can't ever finish the game. And can I explain why for a second?
Please, please.
Because first of all, it shifts all the time in our lives. I mean, you may say, for instance, some people would, that if you are rich, that you have privilege. Well, you do actually. I mean, you have a form of privilege. You have certain advantages over people who are poor, certainly over the very poor. Um, if you are very beautiful, you've got a lot of advantages over people who are really, really ugly, or just plain. I mean, you're going to have a lot of advantage in your life because of that. People are going to want to be near you more. You'll find it easier to find a mate and a partner, and much more. There are lots of things like that which you could point to, and you could say that's a privilege. But you never do know what other things in that person's life might be going on. Like, do people actually think that everyone who's beautiful is also wildly happy or well? Does everyone actually think that the rich don't suffer anything? And now the question then is, what's your hierarchy exactly here? Like, does a rich person with a drug problem and mental health issues ever meet a poor person who's mentally well and physically well? Like, no one knows, because you couldn't work that out. There is no way of working that out. What about day to day? What about somebody who seems to have every advantage in life and then crashes the whole damn thing? Are they privileged? Were they before? Are they after? And who has the time to work that out? I mean, we would have to be permanently asking each other how we were, to be answering each other completely honestly and frankly with up to the minute information. We don't have the time. We don't have the time to do that. Now, the result is we make certain sweeping generalizations. You might make a sweeping generalization such as, I don't know, somebody who speaks like me is wildly privileged, for instance. We do that. We do that a lot with accents, particularly in the UK. But then what do you do after that? You say everyone who's been to a certain university is particularly privileged. Well, they've got a type of privilege. What about people who've gone to university and they're the first people in their family to have been to university? Are they privileged? Where exactly do they land in this? And so I think it's a really unpleasant game to play. And it's reductionist. It doesn't understand the complexity of us as people, or the variety of ways in which people go up and down in their own lives. Um, but watching members of the Windsor family indulging in this game is remarkable, because, of course, it's such a precarious game for them to play. I wrote about this when the Sussexes started doing this, I think last year in, was it Vogue magazine or GQ or one of the other Bibles of the intelligentsia. They did an article in which Harry started whittering on about instinctive bias and unconscious bias and racism and so on. And then they started getting into a variety of other things. And I thought, well, I know where this is going. It's the same boring playbook that so many other people have been rolling off in our era. But as I said at the time, watch out, Harry and Meghan, because this ends with the privilege discussion. And it's possible, I would put it no stronger, it's possible that the second son of the heir to the throne uh, is not going to win an attempt to be seen as lacking in privilege. Now, there's a few ways in which he could do so. I mean, again, let's play this very unpleasant game that we're being encouraged to play. You could say, well, he has grown up as I think the third or fourth in line to the throne, and this makes him very privileged. That's true. You could then say he lost his mother when he was very young, so he then loses a certain amount of privilege because he deserves a certain amount of sympathy, and he does, I think, for that. But then, how far do you take this, and how exactly do you weigh it up? He is attractive. He's had that advantage. I suspect that if he looked less attractive than he did, he'd have found fewer women throwing themselves at him, had fewer sexual and marital opportunities. But even if he was very unattractive, he would have had the advantage of who he is, and a certain number of women would still have thrown themselves at him for the pleasure and privilege of becoming a princess. So this goes on and on. And when you start to talk in these terms, you realize just how impossible it is to weigh this whole thing up. If you can't do it with one person, and you can't with him, how the hell do you think you're going to do it across an entire society all the time?
Do you remember when there was an article written, could have been in The Guardian, about David Cameron, the former Prime Minister, about his child, that sort of implied
right.
because he was the Prime Minister and white that he wasn't allowed, the mourning of his dead child, which I think was like 8 or something, that even because of his privilege, it sort of didn't count.
Yes. It was a Guardian editorial, by the way.
Okay.
It was the editorial that day in the Guardian newspaper. Yes, they said that he may have suffered, but it was privileged suffering he'd had. And you think, how inhumane do you have to become to be try to start weighing up the privilege of a father losing his son? This should be a warning to everyone of what happens when you play that game. You end up trying to weigh up comparative grief. Comparative grief. That's what it is. And that's where this will always lead. It'll lead to inhumane things like that. And by the way, one other point on that. You make yourself, if you play this game, you make yourselves incredibly vulnerable as individuals and as a society for the following reason, which is that even if the game were somehow, I don't say winnable, but completable, shall we say. Even if it were completable as a game, it would rely on everybody always playing the game honestly. Now, is it possible that there are some people in society, I wouldn't want to guess what percentage they make up, who, when they see an advantage, will seize it, even if it means using that advantage dishonestly? Might it be the case, for instance, that there are people who would, on the outside, appear to have had every imaginable privilege in their life, who decide to play the victim because they live in an era where victims are more celebrated than anyone else? Might such a type of person emerge? Might there be people, for instance, who pretend that they've suffered more racism than they have in their lives because they recognize that to make that claim will advantage them? Might it be the case that there are people who've claimed that they've always been prejudiced against as a woman because it could help them now? Might it be the case that there will be people who will say that they've suffered homophobic disadvantages because they will sense that in this moment that could get them a notch further ahead? Oh, you bet there are. You bet there are. Well, how do you weed them out? How do you weed those people out from the sincere people? Answer: we can't. You can't. I can't. Nobody can. And so we get into this terrible game which has no end, which can't be won, and in which you are constantly vulnerable to dishonest actors. That's why I say don't play it. Don't play it.